Welcome back to the Esports Interviews. My name is Clendaniel here with Nibiria, Clendaniel, to try and do a little bit of an overview of Matt's career as we're starting to wind down, moving to other areas. Of course, we work together on the Rising Legends broadcast for TFT, but of course, there's a ton more to Matt's career. And the lessons that you've learned along the way, Matt, we've been trying to draw some of those out here while kind of running through how things have worked out for you over the course of your casting career. But as a general rule, when we're coming to to casters, a lot of the time it is trying, if someone's trying to learn from a caster, they're oftentimes trying to learn, to be like that caster, at least in some aspect of the way which they work. So, just for the purposes of anyone who's watching this who wants to learn to get into casting, what kind of caster would you describe that you are, and perhaps what kind of caster are you not?
I think the most important thing that I've developed in my casting over the last couple of years is downtime. You know, a lot of people, especially play-by-plays, which is how I came up, focus on the fights, focus on like doing little updates. Like in League of Legends, I remember them doing like the 10-minute rundown of the gold before the first dragon and stuff like that. And that's all important, but if you look at and think about a cast in pretty much any game, but especially something like League of Legends, something like Teamfight Tactics, most of the time in the broadcast is downtime. So if you suck at fights, that's cool for the most part because they're going to enjoy the rest of it. So really, you only need serviceable play-by-play. I think I've gotten pretty good at it, but that's kind of a knock-on effect of doing it so much and having a strong idea of what I want to do there. One of the other things that I've focused on is creating segments, doing bits, stuff like that to bring in the audience, creating pre-shows. That is really my passion. And I think the reason that I've gotten hired before is that I can pretty much work with anyone. And that is a very intentional process that took me a while to develop because it was not always true.
All right. Yeah. It's interesting because so much of what you're saying there are things that I aspire to learn to do myself, and I think I've got the kind of the inklings of how to do them. But working with you has definitely shown me a lot of what's been possible. But you mentioned the whole thing with the maybe being like the world's most intense player play isn't your wheelhouse, but is there anything which you have sort of learned along the way to, aside from that, kind of to not focus on as a caster, or that you found to be less important than you would have thought previously?
I think people get hung up on stats a lot, and sometimes without any understanding why. A lot of people will go stats first and then be like, this happens 51% of the time in these 7 scenarios. And it's like, if that is the most interesting thing to you, then on one hand, I firmly believe you should talk about the things you're passionate about. But if you're putting stats in just because you think you need stats, I think that's a really big misstep because people can only hold so many numbers in their head at a time. And all that stats should do is service a point. Like, you can't just throw stats out of there and be like, this augment wins a lot. It's like, cool, congratulations. But if you're trying to make a broader point, you need those numbers to support your argument. And I think a lot of people get hung up on being the best analyst, the smartest boy in the room. And that's just not, I don't think that serves the broadcast as much as focusing on other aspects. To be a good color caster is not the same as being a good analyst, is not the same as knowing the most about the game.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, and I suspect one thing that will come through clearly in this discussion, because I think we're so similar in so many ways, is the I can't remember who told me this originally. The sort of the core idea of why should I, as an audience member, care about what you are saying, and that how close that ties into all the stuff. But hopefully, that's enough to give folks watching a kind of a broad idea of what kind of caster you are. So let's start to get into the more historical stuff. We'll glance over some of the earlier stuff, which is pre-casting, relatively quickly, and move on to the meaty stuff as quickly as we can. But just to kind of to give us some context, in your pre-casting career, what were you doing immediately before your kind of casting stage of life?
School. Literally just school. I did a bit of music, classically trained singer. I used to gig in bars and stuff, but primarily
Nice.
what I spent my time doing was playing video games and going to school, just like pretty much everyone who's watching this. And I was in college at the time, and I had to take medical leave because of mental health issues. For more of that, see the tweets I made sometime around October in 2023. I guess I don't know when people are watching this, but that was kind of how it happened. Was I was just like in this degree, I was doing well. I was always a good student, but I was just like the thought of doing this job, not casting, the biomedical engineering, or as it was later, cognitive science, like in a lab, makes me want to die. So I was like, this maybe is not the best place to be in.
No, I mean that's fair enough. So from being being an unhappy studying situation, I'm sure a lot of people can relate to. Of course, in the UK, there's medic famously, switching from
Yep.
studying to be a doctor to become a caster. So you're very much not alone in that. So how does it doesn't seem like the most obvious leap. I know you said you're doing performing with the singing part of things, but you don't kind of have the esports component in there, or even the computing component in there, really. So how did you get from there to anywhere even remotely close to casting?
Well, I've always been a jackass. And I've always loved making people laugh ever since I was like itty bitty. The moment that I realized that you can say words to make other people happy, it was over. Like it was just over. And I could get attention for doing so.
Oh yeah,
Oh,
oh yeah.
everything I've ever wanted. External validation and making others happy. Oh, but normally I would do that like I would overact like karaoke songs in the kitchen with my parents, just, being real dramatic about it, like faking a microphone, doing jumps around the kitchen. So I always knew that I had interest in like performing, and I had this desire to like be seen. We're not going to go into the psychology of my childhood to come behind that, but there is a very solid through line. So I think it was just kind of right place, right time. I had always wanted to do things in front of an audience, and finally, I kind of happened into the opportunity.
All right, well, take us through then. So, what was that first opportunity for you? Because of course, it's a big. I think it's one of those things that at the time, of course, you never sort of realized quite how big of a moment that can be.
Yeah. Everyone, put on your hats. We're going spelunking into the deep, dark histories of League of Legends. I'd been playing League since it came out, so it wasn't like I started casting first. But I was following along primarily the LCS, but a little bit of the amateur scene because I loved freaking Zyrene back in the day. And I ran into on Reddit. So there was this team back in the ancient days, C9 Challenger, which was essentially the first time an LCS team farmed out a slot because there was still promotion at that point. So they took their former mid laner High, a world champion level mid laner, and put him in the amateur scene with a bunch of other players. And I think also Balls was top lane, so another C9 player, but something like that, where it was just like a ludicrously stacked roster. And people had differing opinions. On the one hand, they were just like, yeah, they should do it. They're going to make money to keep the esports team afloat. And the others were like, this isn't the spirit, guys. I know you're following the letter, but this is not the spirit of the amateur scene. So they were really against the underdogs, this team called DFG. I forget what it stands for, but it had a bunch of popular streamers at the time. God, was it RF? It's a guy known for playing Nidalee top. Like it was a bunch of like one tricks. It was a bunch of like unique streamers. So they were very popular. Lo and behold, they had a matchup, the most highly anticipated matchup of the challenger scene at the time. And the Riot studio was closed for renovations. So everyone was like, fuck, what do we do? So this thread on Reddit was someone saying, hey, I have a production setup. I can cast, but I need someone to do it with me. And I was getting PT at the time. I was taking the medical leave. I was getting all kinds of things done in my life, but I didn't really have a hobby beyond gaming by myself. But I ran into this and was like, I brought my microphone with me. I might as well. I don't know. It was just such a spur of the moment decision. I almost didn't expect it, and I saw it, and my brain was like, yes, absolutely.
Yeah, because I think for anyone who's watching this who's never done casting before, you'll see opportunities like that, and and be like, oh, well, I'm not a caster right now, therefore I'm not going to do that. I mean, I know for you in that particular moment it was more an impulse, but what kind of advice would you give to people who do run into opportunities like that and maybe think, if I haven't done it already, I shouldn't try and be doing it?
Well, I think it helped that I had talked to the guy before. His name was Blaster Boy 2, Brian, one of my close friends ever since. And he did say that there wasn't a ton of experience required. And you'll find postings like that. Ultimately, you just got to get your feet wet. Like, you're going to have a first cast, and it's going to suck. It is going to suck so bad. You're going to look back on it in a couple of years and be like, holy shit, how was I legally allowed to use a microphone? Like, it is so bad. I mean, there are people who are natural. I help build the UD esports team, so out the University of Delaware. And we had this one guy, the Rocket League team captain, who had moved on to give the captain spot to someone else. And he did his very first cast of Rocket League, and I was like, fuck, this guy has it. This guy has the sense of what a cast should be. And you'll run into people like that, and for me it's so infuriating because I had to work so hard to get to that point, and they just have it. Memo. We've both worked with him on air. Dude just knows what to say. Kenobi as well was really good about this. They know what they want to say, they know how to find their way into it, and they just say it. And it's just it took me months to learn how to do that. So maybe you'll be a natural, and good for you. I sucked ass. But if you accept that sucking ass is part of sucking less, I think it's easier. And just remember that you're doing it. Don't do it for any reason other than the love of casting.
I think that's something which I really struggled with in the same sort of thing, because again, they were so similar as casters in kind of respect. Is I think it's so easy to come into stuff like this and acting, stage acting, voice acting, anything. See other people who are very, very good at it immediately, or have a kind of background they can pull on that means that they have a big step up for being new at it, and think, oh, that's what it looks like to be a person who should be doing this. And I think it's so reassuring to know that there are other people who start off and be like, oh no, I was terrible at this when I started, but I just liked it so much I stuck it out and became good at it because of liking it. Whereas where you could be amazingly good at something naturally, but not care enough about it to really develop meaningfully.
Yeah, and I mean you'll even see that happen a couple times. I fully contribute my growth as a caster relative to the rest of the scene to working my ass off. I was casting every week, and most people were grinding out games and being like, this is the way to become a better caster. If you have that mentality right now, anyone in the audience, drop it immediately. It is so much more important to get the value out of the time you're casting, get the value out of every cast. Look into it, see what you did wrong, see what you want to do better, and take one or two of those things, any more and you're going to fucking forget. One or two of those things and take it into the next cast and then say, how'd I do? Did I like that? Do I feel like I've solved the problem? If so, find another thing. And if you notice something within the first 5 minutes, totally valid for that to be it. I used to suck at champion select. So the thing I found that I didn't like happened in the first 5 minutes of a VOD. And that's so valid because you have to go through that first 5 minutes no matter what.
I had that recently where I started reviewing myself and I was like, it took me 15 seconds to be like, oh, didn't like that.
Yeah.
I was like, for me, the last one was, I was actually casting a member who we were just talking about, and I was, and I realized that I was asking him way too much stuff and I wasn't giving any of my own opinion on things. And I was like, oh, that feels like, even if my opinions were pretty lightweight, it still feels weird from a viewer's point of view that I'm not giving any kind of opinion at all. So yeah, absolutely. I think that's, but the whole thing on VOD review as well. Like, I know that it's very, very painful, and I still find it painful to listen back to my own VODs.
So
But
hard, dude. It
I
took
think
me
I
like
think
5 years until I could do it without cringing out of my skin.
I think that the point you made was really good. That if you can just listen to like 1 minute or 30 seconds of your casting, you'll probably find something that sucks. Because our biggest fear is that we really just suck at casting. And so when it turns out that you can just listen to a random 30 seconds and be like, so two things will happen. Either you'll listen to it and you'll be like, yep, I sucked, and you've got something to improve on. Or no, you didn't suck, and you can be like, I didn't suck at casting, my brain must have been wrong. Like, what a miracle. I'll keep trying that until I find something where I do suck, and then I can at least be like, there you go, I was right.
Yeah, it really is just like it's so much like about having a growth mindset about these things, and it's just like it's a never ending, it's almost Sisyphean. Like you are never going to look back at a cast and be like, there were no problems with this whatsoever. I've had a couple casts where I'm like, that was an absolute fucking heater. I just did the best cast I've done in my entire life, and it felt so easy. Even still, you can go back and you can find something. I promise you, in the best cast you've ever done, you will find one or two things where you're like, man. And I think it's important to recognize that not as a bad thing. Like, so many people interpret mistakes as failure, but you wouldn't get any better if you didn't notice your mistakes at all. Like, that's just people think you magically get better. This is going back to what I said about the repetition. So many people have this like misunderstanding that just doing something more is enough to get better. That's true up to a point. You do really just have to grind it out for mechanics, but you can grow so much more, so much quicker if you're just thinking about what you're doing and spending more time thinking than doing.
Well, I mean, let's start moving on to some of those initial lessons you did get, early on in your career, because of course, as much as we're hoping that this conversation will be formative for some of the people watching, I'm sure there were many people who were very formative for you starting out. So, what kind of things were core to your initial gains in casting? Because you said, I think it's a really good idea to be able to think of this as when you're starting out, you get to make these substantial gains very quickly. So, what were they for you?
So I think I owe my entire career to Sean Day 9 Plot and the Day 9 dailies in the StarCraft era.
So
because he, like, I learned how to run a show from watching that. But more importantly, I learned what I like to hear from a cast. I really liked, there was this at PAX Seattle, there was a StarCraft 2 tournament called Battle of the Xel'Naga. And it was like a bunch of custom maps, and it would be shit that would piss off any player. Like, it'd be like every random amount of seconds between 0 and 120, 40 banelings drop from the sky onto your base. And it's just like, this is bullshit. I hate this. But it was a for fun tournament, and you'd have things like Jeff in Control Robinson, God bless, rest in peace, genuinely. Huge inspiration to me growing up, but he was a player at this point, and he stood up, walked over, sprinted over to another player's PC on the other team and unplugged their keyboard and mouse in the middle of the tournament. And it was just like fine. And then later he stole someone's water bottle and just like drenched himself in it. Oh, it was so good. But like that was my inspiration going into it. So doing my first cast, I was speaking with Brian, like I said, and really the first nugget of information I got about casting from the driver's seat essentially was that casting is a conversation, and I don't think I have ever received better advice than that. Other than like be yourself, and I'll talk about that later, but really so many people, and this happens at the professional level, and it is a massive pet peeve of mine. Peter, you know this. We've had this discussion a million times about how like I feel like it's a personal affront to me when it happens. Where they kind of just do book reports past each other. where it's just like, here's the things I want to talk about. And the other person will stop, ignore all of that information, and say, here's the things that I want to talk about. And they'll go in like 2-minute chunks. And 2 minutes doesn't sound like a lot of time, but if you've ever listened to like, when I talk and make a point, even in this interview, my job is to say things. If I go 2 minutes on the same point, you're bored out of your fucking mind. Like, that's just how it happens. So it was really formative to come in with the expectation that you're passing back and forth as the natural flow of the cast. If you're not passing back and forth, you are doing it wrong. And I think that probably is the most formative thing I've ever heard.
Well, I mean, it kind of, you end up in a prisoner's dilemma kind of situation, don't you? Where if both people choose to pass the microphone to each other, great. You've created a duo at that point. You have created a duo where you are both supporting each other, like, there's kind of a triangle, and you're both pushing and making a structure that's worth something. But if either person decides they want to book report, then if I'm like, hey Matt, how's it going? And you speak for 2 minutes straight, and like, also most of it's falling out of my head at that point. I'm like, oh boy, and I sort of bring up another topic area, and then you talk for another 2 minutes after I've talked for about 10 seconds. Like, that doesn't work at that point. So just because you brought it up, for people who are maybe running into that situation at any level of play, what kind of things have you found in that kind of area of trying to get past the whole talking past each other? Because absolutely, it's something that comes up everywhere and at every level.
I think I want to delve deeper into the mechanics of why it sucks, just for the people at home really quick, because we've had conversations on this, but it's not always obvious. What ends up happening, like you said, is someone starts talking for 2 minutes. But during that time, part of casting, when the other person is speaking, is active listening, but also kind of putting in your head, you'll stop doing this as you get better, and you'll be better on your feet just responding to the last thing that's said. And that should be your end state. But you will hear things and you'll be like, I have something to say about this. But they keep talking for 2 minutes and bringing up more points. So you have to do one of two things. Abandon the really good point that you came up of that builds on something that happened a minute ago. Or drop everything and have to come up with something completely new. Or, this can happen with either of them, you've got something that you need to catch the audience up on, and now you have to do housekeeping for 2 full minutes because you've missed 2 minutes of content. So you end up monologuing past each other because you can't get to parody again. You have to keep going, like you were saying. It feeds itself. And the easiest way to break out of it when you're starting is to learn to ask questions of your co-caster. You will end up sounding like you've just learned the Socratic method for the first time. Again, sucking is part of it. So you're going to be like, this really sucks. But what it's going to do is try and teach you about what it's like to be the other caster. Like, when you end up with someone talking past you, think about why it's frustrating and remember that when you're doing it. I always, Peter, we always try and do pretty bite-sized pieces so that if someone else has something to say to build off our last point, they have that space, and I think that's so important. So questions is first, and then be willing to put your ego aside. I don't mean that as in I'm the best caster of all time, no one else deserves to speak, but I think reflexively it feels bad if you have a really good point that you don't get to say. And a lot of casters' first instinct is, that point is good, therefore I must say it. You're going to come up with another good point. Throughout a cast, Peter, I don't know about your experience with this, but I'll come up with at least like 5 to 10 points that I think are really good and I don't get to say because we've moved past them. And that's okay. That is a part of the cast.
Matt, I've been the guy who's had the really good point and be like, you know what? The moment may have passed. I'm still going to say that point anyway.
It's tempting.
What I would say in that regard is, I think it's really useful to have a notepad and pen next to you so that you can make a little note as to what that point was, because if it is good, you can probably find a way to bring it back in later on. You probably only need like a word to prompt yourself, like goal, if we're doing League of Legends, like goal totals or something, just to like, and even if you don't bring the point back in, I think just doing something that will help bring that point out of your mind and onto paper so that you can then discard it from your active thinking is really important, because it's everything you're saying makes complete sense to me. That I will get a big point in mind and then I won't be able to let it go if somebody changes tack midpoint, and I'm like, but I really want to talk about the first thing and I'm not really listening to the second thing. And then when they change to a third thing, I'm like, oh, I'm just gone. Like this, I was
And you
half
get
formed on the
bored
second thing.
too.
Yeah,
It's just like, please shut up. Please, for the love of God, shut up. I am so bored. I haven't done anything in 2 minutes. And it's the most infuriating thing. And like, active listening, I will say it again, is the single most important skill you can have as a caster. If you don't know what it is, there are a million YouTube videos on it. I highly recommend it because, Peter, you know this. I do this on desks all the time. You need to be able to like interact and react pretty much instantly. You cannot plan ahead that much. Like when I hear a point, I've got like 3 seconds to come up with a point afterwards. That is a skill. That is a muscle you can work out, and you should be exercising it every cast because it's so handy to be able to listen to any point and from the last word, you instantly know what you're going to say without having to rehearse it.
gosh, okay. I'm gonna try not to let us be drawn too far off track here because this will always happen in our conversations. But I think this is a good time as anything to kind of to draw out to what I think is a sort of a major lighthouse point here to follow on to what you were saying, which is that I think a big thing that is very easy to miss coming into casting is that the vibe of the people talking to each other is ultimately what people really experience. Like it's not whether or not you came up with something really clever or that whatever you did, and it's so much easier to build a compelling vibe between two people than it will ever be by yourself. People listen to podcasts, I know I do, literally because the presenters have a good chemistry with each other, and I'll just listen to them talk about anything. So that's just as true for esports as it would be for anything else.
Yeah, and that's why downtime's so important. It's the same thing. It's all about bringing out good vibes because if you don't focus on that, a lot of the quality of your cast comes from the quality of the game. And there are going to be some dog shit games you're going to have to cast. Like you are going to have, I remember in League of Legends, I had one of the hardest casts of all time in the LPL because it was Vici Gaming versus LGD. And you don't need to know anything about the LPL. I will tell you, those were the bottom two teams. And they both sucked ass. And I knew the game was going to suck. So I came up with a bunch of skits. I came up with a bunch of jokes because I knew there was no other way to get through that cast. And you know what? One of my better casts from that year, because we just accepted that the game itself wasn't going to be providing a ton of the entertainment. So we were just like, let's vibe through it. Let's get the bants out there.
All right. I'm going to forcibly bring us back to what we were actually talking about because
Absolutely.
I realized we've taken multiple side roads to where we've got to just then. Let's go back to your history because,
Sure.
well, I mean, functionally this is part of your history because, of course, we're talking about you as a caster, but let's just sort of catch up on where we were there. So you find this thread on Reddit from Blaster Boy. You're going to go in and do your first bit of casting. So how does that first cast go?
Absolutely terribly, Peter. Let me tell you. I have never been that nervous before, so I grabbed a beer, and the only one that was in the house was an old Coors Light from like 2 years ago, because none of us really drink. So that was miserable. It was like drinking piss. It was awful. Bear Grylls might have appreciated the flavor, but everyone else is going to hate it. And I just could not figure out what to say when. I could not follow a fight to save my life. I'd be like, Maokai, it is there, and the fight's already over. It was awful. So, but I had a surprisingly good time despite it. It was a best of 3. And I didn't really cast again after that for a while. But a couple of months later, I talked to Blaster Boy again, and I was like, "Hey, I've kind of got the itch. Is there anything else you know of that I could do?" And he happened to be the production lead on a volunteer tournament called Learning Fives, which is where I really bit my teeth as a growing caster, and is probably I probably attribute a lot of my success to that environment, honestly, and a lot of my growth.
Well, so what was it about learning fives that helped? Because I mean, a lot of people are going to be in that same situation of being like, how do I choose my first place to go casting? Because potentially it could be a bad experience or at least a not particularly productive experience. So what the learning fives? What was it about them that made them a good pick?
Um, I think there were a couple of factors. One, it was created by someone who worked full time as a commentator, and while he wouldn't have the time to watch every cast, he would sometimes pop in afterwards and be like, "Hey, noticed a couple things." But
Okay.
all of us were improvement focused. Every single one of us knew that something was wrong with every cast, or rather that there's somewhere to improve in every cast, and we would say so. We would say, "Here's what I liked, here's what I didn't like. Something I noticed is this, and I think you should work on it, and I think I should work on this," and then we'd come to a consensus essentially, and then we'd go back and we'd practice, and then the next cast we'd pull that forward. Um, wasn't competitive. Nobody had any ego. There was no money at stake. A lot of people in North American League of Legends amateur came up through like Upsurge, which was very competitive, which was very, you know, they wanted those $10 an hour or whatever they were paying. Versus for me, I never had any interest in those places because the vibes of the casters all fucking sucked. And now that I'm out of North American League of Legends casting, I can gladly say that. The vibes were awful. But we just had this great environment for growth, and the setup was the games were all below professional level. Like the highest level games we had were diamond, and those were pretty rare. Most of the games I cast were like silver, gold, and plat. So you have the time to cut your teeth on the mechanics, and then for someone like me who really felt that downtime was the key, I had the perfect spot because the game is going to suck. Like I said before, the quality of the game is going to be garbage. You're going to have moments where you can really bring out the players, and you can have moments where you can celebrate the wins that they have. But sometimes you don't know what they're doing. They're looking stupid. You mention it. You don't bully them, but you're just like, I don't know what either team is looking for. It seems like blank. And then you've got 5 minutes of them just farming pointlessly. So I think all of that combined to be a really good formative experience for me and a really good like ramp to growth.
Okay, well, that's really interesting because I wasn't expecting, because we discussed some of the stuff before, but like I didn't know about the learning fives things, and so that seems like a really good like practical thing for newer viewers to take in is yeah, just if you're going into a organization that's going to be doing casting for anything, like just trying to figure out, yeah, are they focused on growth? Like, do they? I mean, it sounds amazing, honestly, having that kind of circular feedback kind of thing going on, and that hasn't been the case for me in nearly any of the orgs I've worked with. Because, I mean, I guess in your case, you didn't. I presume, did you? If this was the first organization you worked with, presumably this was just going to, this was just how it was at that place, and you didn't have a basis of comparison to say, oh, this is unusual or something I should be seeking out. Just, oh no, this is just how it is.
Yeah, I mean it was my first ever time casting really, and that first cast with Blaster Boy, he also gave me feedback, and he was like, "Well, here's what I liked, or I think more productively, here's the seeds of something that eventually could become something that I like." He did not present it that way, but I knew what he was saying. And I appreciate him for not going full in. But yeah, I mean, that was just what it was like for me. So I've always tried to pull that forward with my casting partners, and especially the ones I'm closer with, because it's hard when you get into freelancing. A lot of casters come in with egos. A lot of casters come in believing that they have everything figured out and that they don't need help from anyone else. And while it's valid to think that you have the line on casting and you think that you like know what you want to improve in, it is helpful to hear other people's perspectives, if for nothing else other than saying, I hear you and I completely disagree. Because casting is so much about knowing what you like, knowing what you don't like, and using that to know what you're going to do so that you don't sound bored to tears.
I mean, that's certainly good here with my experience as well. And I mean, having talked to some of the Riot casters in the past, I think that's still true at the at the top level. I've heard them saying, oh, someone will come up to me after the end of the game and be like, this thing you did at this point, I really didn't think it works. Like, for X, Y, and Z reasons, I think this would have worked much better. And then for the person receiving that feedback to be like, okay, thank you for giving me that feedback. I'm not going to, like, they wouldn't necessarily be like, I'm not going to do anything with that to their face, but taking the feedback, being like, thank you for giving that, and then just going on to completely ignore it. Or at least, maybe ignoring it's the wrong term, because you said, like, using that as a way to give yourself a different perspective and trying to be honest with yourself and say, is this something that I could potentially find useful to explore, even if I don't do it in the way which they suggested. If you come to me and say like, oh, I think you're not, something you're missing out on is maybe you're not bringing enough of the players' backstories into your thing, and you could do that by by doing X, Y, and Z, and I can be like, I don't like X, Y, and Z, but the general idea of including that more of my kind of things, and the way I'll get there is my own way, which may be like X and A and B, is still useful to hear from you, even if I don't follow your solution exactly.
Yeah, and I think one thing to keep in mind on that I'm splitting this into 2 points, so I'm going to make the first one. If you ever listen to Twitch chat or Reddit, you're an idiot. Let me back this up. Twitch chat is an amalgamation of people that love to shit disturb. They love to be critical. They love to say negative things. And there's always going to be at least one person who has a problem with what you're doing. If you listen to all of them, you will end up progressing forward and backwards, because one person's going to say, like, I know the way I cast. It's not very, like, quote unquote professional. Some people think I'm dumb because of the way I cast, but I'm never going to listen to Twitch chat being like, I really wish Nibiria would go into like more depth or like use more descriptive language. I'm like, no, fuck you. Half of our audience is English as a second language. So using, more colloquial terms is an advantage to their comprehension if they decide to watch the English broadcast. And 2, I want to be everyone's buddy on air. You can't really be everyone's buddy if you're using like these $17 million SAT words. Like, you don't need 6 syllables to say something. You can just say it. So just ignore Twitch chat, please. I'm begging you. But do understand for yourself, like, if someone gives you feedback and they give you a reason, this applies to Twitch chat and Reddit as well. But like I've said, you really should ignore it beyond. If there's a general consensus, if there's a Reddit thread about something you did and everyone's saying that they hated the cast, something went wrong. That's what you need to pull out, because audiences will not diagnose the reason that they didn't like something. They will realize they're not liking something and look for a reason. It's how we all work. You hear, God, this cast sucks. And then you listen closely and you find one thing you don't like. That's why the cast sucked. Realistically, it's something completely different. Like, if you're just like, oh my God, I remember one from the LPL. Reddit was saying that the IG versus RNG match that Hysterics and Clement casted was very biased towards IG. I remember this very strongly because that was the right advice Raz gave. Was, I don't think the bias was the problem. They were missing something else, and we diagnosed it as, we talked a lot about IG and didn't really sit with the RNG points as much. So it wasn't that they were biased. We hit them about even, but the IG points really like sat in the space, and the RNG ones often got moved past. So if we'd listened to Reddit, we would have been like, I guess we talk about RNG more, which is just not, that's not the thing. It's the quality of points. They can point out maybe you're talking about them less, but maybe RNG wasn't doing shit that game. It happens. So that's probably the two biggest advices around feedback.
Yeah, because that's really interesting. I think that does apply to. I know for me, I've really struggled with it with the TFT stuff in particular, because there is a larger trend of people being like, play by play in TFT is is not welcome and shouldn't be used. And I've really struggled with that, of being like, with that being a lot of time my unique selling point, and then sort of pulling back on, oh, if it's the thing I do best, maybe I should start doing it less, and then having to sort of play catch up to even get up to the same level again. But yeah, well, that's really interesting. I think the bigger point I wanted to come out to, which I'm hoping you can speak on, is it sounds like what you're kind of getting to is, what are you trying to do on the cast? Like, what are your priorities? And like, are the things which you are doing, are they aligning with those priorities? Or, well, firstly, do you know what those priorities are? Like, are you coming in with some sort of plan for the cast and be like, okay, I know that, I'm going to be pushing this team as the underdog, this team as the, the big established one. And then using that kind of, I think it feels like that's the kind of thing which you can more easily modify, because everything else falls under it. Like, if you've got an objective and then you fail at implementing that objective, I think it's easier to see that. And then if people are saying, yeah, they don't like what you're doing, that maybe it's trying to figure out if it's an implementation of the objective or the objective itself.
Yeah, and I think it really comes down to casting, like any art form, is about making choices. And I think, at least when I was coming up, we're not taught that. We're not told that. We're told there is a right way to cast. And I think this has changed a little bit, but especially in the early LCS, Riot put a heavy emphasis on homogenous casts. That everyone kind of did the same style of cast. Everyone put the same priority on everything. Everyone had the same rules. And it resulted in the audience thinking, oh, this is the way to cast. And then you'd measure yourself against that yardstick. What are they doing that I'm not? Not that that's not valid. If you have a caster you really like, steal their shit, 100%. Good artists borrow, great artists steal. Like, if someone else does something that you're like, this is the coolest thing I've ever had, take it, do it, because you're clearly excited about it. But remember that everything is a choice, and maybe you disagree with some of the stuff I've already said, and that's cool. Like, if you have a different vision of what a cast looks like, that's valid, but understand that you have a vision. Understand what that vision looks like, and understand how to work towards accomplishing that vision. That's the important part.
I'd like to narrow in on that, because I'm aware that we're running relatively long on our kind of schedule here, so I'll try and wrap things up in the next 5 minutes or so. But in terms of making choices, I think this is such a good thing to end on, because it's something that I know I'm personally working on at the moment. Currently with a lot of my casting, I'll kind of come into it and I'll get, I'll come to the other side of it. But I really wish that I was more cognizant of the choices that I'm making as a caster, and being like, to have someone like, have you pass me and be like, I was going to say this, but actually, I feel like this cast needs more of X or Y, and therefore, that's what I'm going to do. Like, whether or not that's right or wrong, by making that choice, I can kind of try something and not just be reactive, but I'm going to make an active choice. So, I was kind of wondering, I don't know if you can give me an example of, like, one that sticks out in your mind, like, of choices that either, I guess ideally a contrasting pair of a choice that you felt worked really well, and a choice that you learn a lot from it not going well.
I think a lot of the choices that I've made that I've been really proud of come from the early Rising Legends stuff, when we had a much more loose front of show, to the point where I could exert a lot of influence on how it went. I was really proud of the choices I made on desk, especially at the first Rising Legends finals, because I would come into those desks and I would have a bit, and we would execute on the bit, and it would either work or it wouldn't. But I was making a choice. I had a vision. I was able to accomplish it, and most of them landed. And I was really proud of that. Our analyst desk didn't lose viewers, which is a rarity among esports events, and I was really proud of that. And generally, if I'm in a cast, I want to work with the flow of whatever someone else is doing. If someone keeps coming back to a certain subject, I will set them up for that subject. And almost always that's a good idea because you're both on the same page for it. You know, like we said, the vibe is always more important. But where I have had those issues, I've bitten off a little more than I can chew in a couple of situations, and I've tried a bit without the buy-in of other people, and it was outside of their comfort zone too much.
Okay.
I'm not sure everyone appreciates this about me, but I do believe you should be out of your comfort zone a little bit every time you cast. You should not feel like you completely have this down pat and that you can predict everything that's happening, because it makes you make choices. But there's a limit. You can only go so far, because I remember this has happened in Rising Legends. This especially happened back when I was really learning, back at Learning Fives. I would go for something goofy, something gaffy, and my other caster would be like, no, we have to stay on the line. We have to talk about the game. I refuse to make jokes. I refuse to get off topic. So I would just be like joking at a brick wall. And what I learned to do instead was make my own jokes self-contained. Instead of needing buy-in from them, I would just be able to start, plan, and execute a bit on my own without their input. Then they're happy because they're not being asked to do anything. And I'm happy because I'm making a joke for the audience and hopefully entertaining someone. So that probably my biggest growth point, honestly, was those things fucking up. When I tried a bit and it failed for the first time because my other caster just would not come on board, I was like, oh shit, how do I solve this? And I kept not solving it for a while. But figuring that out has made me so much better at working with different types of people, because I can figure out how much they'll buy into a bit and I can push right up to that limit, and the rest I do on my own.
That's really fascinating, because I think I've had exactly that same experience before where, you know, as a newer caster coming in, or if casters just trying out something which you maybe haven't tried out before in terms of stylistic, like making jokes, exactly. I know at the moment, I think Wheat is a great case study on the Rising Legends. Like, he's a very funny guy who is, I think, just currently like trying out that kind of stuff, and you know, having some hits, having some stuff miss. But it's very tempting when you have that first joke not land and people just kind of like just stonewall you on it, to think, oh, it must be because I'm not funny. That, you know, that's the reason why that didn't work. And so once you've done that, once you've internalized that reason as, oh, that's why, you can't do anything, because then if you just accept, I'm not funny, therefore I shouldn't keep working on it. So is there anything that you would do to, you know, to try and differentiate between when something is something that you should keep trying to develop versus, oh, this is just a fundamentally bad idea?
I would say think through it pretty structurally. Jokes fall apart when you try to explain them. So this is going to be an inherently weird thing to talk about, but understand why you're trying to do the thing you're doing. What are you trying to accomplish? Why do you think this is the best way to accomplish it? Because if you haven't thought through those two things about something you're trying, there's a decent chance that it's just a bad idea. And think about what you're trading off to get it. You know, I really like to make goofs and gaffs, but some people would prefer like the complete seriousness of like a heavy double analyst duo. I know I'm trading that off. I know I'm trading off on depth of analysis too. Well, frequency. I'll say it that. I'm trading off on the frequency of analytical points in order to make jokes, because I think the trade-off of getting a better vibe on the cast is worth talking about the game a little less and making those points that we do talk about the game all the more important. So you really have to dissect what you're trying to do and dissect why it's not working. If it's not working because you're failing to deliver it, see what you can do about the delivery. If it's not working no matter what you try and you're on like iteration 6, it may be time to just drop it. But again, failure is part of the process. So wait until you've tried a couple different variations before you try and like shit can it.
And I guess I would add on to the tail end of that, because again, I think that's a really, really useful thing is, I think for me, as a perennially very anxious person, is getting buy-in from the other casters. Like, I've got a different, like, I know for you, Matt, you like to kind of like to do the whole spring on another person to get the maximum kind of reality of the situation. But for me, because I don't have the confidence to do that, that I found that like, telling the people about it, I expected people to be more pushing back and be like, "That's a stupid idea," but I think people are generally, as long as you can present it like in a way which makes it sound like it's going to be entertaining, then just like saying, "Hey, this is what I liked for the structure." You don't necessarily need to give all the details about it, but like, this is the kind of structure of what I'm going to be doing. Are you guys all cool with that? And having them just be like, okay, I think can make it a lot easier to, to go through that when other people suddenly know why you are doing what you are doing, and find a difference. I'm aware we're out of time though, so Matt, it has been incredible to talk to you. We have got like we've barely got through any of your history at all.
Okay.
But hey, it's been a lot of fun. Thank you so much, Matt. Hopefully we'll get a chance to have this conversation again down the line, but that has been incredibly useful. Of course, links to all of your stuff will be in below. In a future session, we'll hopefully be able to look over some of your notes from previous things and go into a lot more depth and a lot more stuff. But for now, thank you so much for coming on the Esports Interviews. For just in the immediate, in this very moment, is there anything you'd like folks to be made aware, and I can drop off in the description?
Not really. Keep watching Rising Legends. Very excited for the rest of the season. Just trying to round everything out. Since I know I'm not going to be able to make it to Alicante for any other events, I'm really excited to like get through the Golden Spatula Cup, get through the finals, and finish off the high notes. So I'm sure we have a calendar somewhere that we can put in there.
All right, absolutely yes. So I think I've got them all in my Google Calendar. So yes, the EMEA finals, which will be online finals, running from the 5th to 7th of July, and then the TFT Championship the following weekend, so between the 12th and the 14th. So it should be a whole heck of a lot of fun. Thank you so much, Matt. Again, any last thoughts before we end?
I just wanted to double up on that buy-in point. There's a lot of different ways to get buy-in. You can just tell people that you're going to do something and let them deal with it. So don't be afraid to try stuff. That's what casting's all about.
All right, Matt, thank you so much. And hopefully we'll talk again. Well, of course we'll talk again, but hopefully we'll get to have this kind of conversation again down the line. Thank you so much. And again, please, if you haven't already, do go check out Matt on Twitter, Nibiria. Again, links will be in the description. And thank you guys for watching.
Thank you.